little bit less local, Yukon.
Yeah.
Did you see that article?
I did. And this is something that we've talked about a bit. You've actually brought it up at a meeting we went to with some housing authority.
Yeah, I think we talked about that a little bit in an episode.
And I've had this come to me from a few clients as well that are like, how does this work now? And basically what took place in Yukon is a lady rents a unit and she is unable to stay in her unit because her fixed term is ending.
Yeah.
And there's a rent control in place.
Yeah,
so
their rent control in the Yukon is based on inflation. So it's not a fixed number. It's rolling whatever the inflation is at the time. I don't know.
Makes more sense. Yep. Anyways, so her landlord's saying, look, I need to increase the rent by, let's say, $100, which is more than what...
200. It was $200.
Yeah. Okay, $200, which is more than what inflation's allowing for, which would have been probably, what, $50-$60?
Yeah, maybe something like that.
Yeah, roughly there. And she is in agreement with this. She's comfortable to pay the extra $200. But as per the rules, he is unable to increase her rent because she's this, like the staying tenant. And her fixed term's ending. So technically, he needs to boot her out.
Yeah.
To then put in a new tenant at that lease rate.
Yeah, which is what's going on.
Even though they're both in agreement.
They're both in agreement. Not only are they both in agreement, they went to the tenancy board and tried to say, what can we do
to make this
work? We want to sign a legal agreement that saying, no, the tenant is waiving their right to this and blah, blah, blah. What can we sign? And the tenancy board said effectively, nope, can't do it.
Similar to what we faced here. And the reason, I know that a couple of you guys will probably be like, and this is what I was kind of thinking, was just do it. But the problem is if you have a problem 3 months in, you're now technically in breach of contract or breach of the actual rules, and someone's going to have to hold the bag on that, which will likely be the landlord.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah,
and it's the landlord who runs the risk there because say they just have a falling out.
Yeah.
Right? Like things happen and all of a sudden the tenant doesn't like the landlord as much. Like the landlord does something stupid and now they have a disagreement.
Yeah.
Well, the tenant would have a claim to say, well, you violated the new tenancy rules and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And there's also going to be people out there that would say, well, $200 is a little bit steep. And for an existing tenant, I would agree. Like that's a bit of a hit to an existing tenant. Even if you're trying to bring up your rents closer to market. I mean, I know I would never increase an existing tenant by $200. That's just me personally. Yeah. But if I were trying to get them to market rent, maybe $100 increase and just have a conversation like, hey, I like having you here.
That's still outside the realm, though.
We got to move you upside. Exactly. And this is where when we had that kind of conference with these representatives from legal aid, IPONs, and the tenancy board and some from housing, I asked this question like, well, what if there's a situation where you have an existing tenant at the end of their fixed term lease and they would like very much to stay and you as a landlord would like very much to stay? Can they mutually agree to a $50 increase? And they're like, no, you cannot mutually agree to a $50 increase. It either has to be the max allowable, it's maybe $22, or you have to vacate them. They have to lose the unit. And while this lady was so devastated because she has to sit there and watch the new people come and view her unit and move into it, and she very much wants to stay.
And was willing to pay
what they're going to pay. The exact same amount
that they're going to pay.
That these new people are paying. So, and she said she's devastated. She's like, I wanted to live here forever. I feel like I'm having something taken from me that I am agreeing to. And this is
where the logic and common sense is completely gone.
Yeah.
And the system makes little sense. But on the flip side, I guess my concern from this comes is that I don't know what they have in San Francisco, but basically you just don't have a fixed term anymore. And I think that's where it's going to boil into. I don't think this is going to boil into them coming up with like, if common sense prevails, we can sign a lease.
Well, this is what the legal aid person clearly wanted.
Yeah,
right?
It's going to be no more fixed terms. You have to do year to year. You have no options, which is, again, removing another option as a landlord, which I think becomes concerning because it's not just purely about like greed and making money out of this. As a landlord, you need to have some options. I have clients who sign tenants and they're not super comfortable, so they do a 6-month fixed term. Because like, look, I need the ability to make this change because we're all kind of forgetting. I know right now it's all a big bad landlord, but there are lots of tenants that can cause issue for people. There's professional tenants that literally make a job out of either destroying the places, stealing from the houses, not paying rent. And so if you don't have these things in place, you're really running a lot of risk. And right now we have low vacancy here locally, so it seems like everything's great. But as that starts to tick up, you start to face a lot more of this. So they're going to put all these rules in and kind of take away any strength that a landlord would have or any control a landlord would have. And when things pull back, they're going to be facing this issue of, oh crap, now I'm dealing with poor quality tenants and they're destroying my units, and what am I supposed to do? And that's where you lead into this thing of people pulling doors off and turning the water off and turning
Well, it's
the
also
power
like
off.
it's going to get to the point where, and I've had this situation recently where if I know that I'm going to have a lot of difficulty ever getting rid of a tenant, ever raising the rent, ever doing anything with them, even if they're a bad actor,
Yeah.
I would rather sit a unit vacant than
Yep.
give someone a quote unquote chance. Like, you know what? I get a good vibe from this person, you know, like they've maybe been through some stuff. Maybe their credit rating's not so good, but they've got a good story and I'd love to give them a chance here.
Yep.
No,
Yeah.
not going to happen. Right. Be like, you just can't run that risk anymore. And what was so frustrating about that meeting with the folks there, their answer was like, well, we heard about someone getting a $500 increase. I'm like, well, that's not what I'm talking about. I asked you what a $50 increase that
Yeah.
both sides very much wanted to accept
Yeah.
and, you know, want to agree to. And they sort of said you can't do it. The tenancy board lady just said,
not in the rules.
it's not in the rules. And I think she was sort of hinting like, I suppose you could do it, but do it at your own risk. The legal aid person was basically saying, well, the whole idea of a fixed term lease is offensive to begin with. They should be able to stay there for as long as they want and blah, blah, blah. That was clearly her position. And she was quick to say, and my position doesn't necessarily represent legal aid, blah, blah, but, you know, this is someone who's paid by tax dollars to advocate in this space and doesn't believe in, you know, traditional private property laws and fixed terms and the legislation that is here. And they kept going to these extremes of like, well, she was arguing that woman in the Yukon doesn't actually have a choice, that she had an ultimatum of, well, you either stay here or you pay $200 extra. It's like, no, she has a choice to stay there. Like, it's depending on how you look at it. Is that an ultimatum or is that a free market choice?
Yep.
And if she, as an adult, wants to do it so badly that they try to take legal measures through the tenancy board to do it, and then she's actually denied that choice, right?
Yep.
Like, it's not the landlord stifling her freedom of choice. It's the legislation stifling her freedom of choice. And another point made by the tenancy board lady, she's like, well, I said, well, like, I really want to keep this tenant, you know, but I can't do it. You're making it so I can't. And then they said, well, if you really wanted to keep that tenant, you would just keep them.
Yeah.
It's like, well, now you're saying, like, my choice is either between...
I have to pay to keep the tenant.
I have to pay to keep the tenant, or I need to decide between, well, do I want to do right by that tenant, or do I want to do right by my business, which is in turn doing right by my family and the people that I support?
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, man, I'm going to make the choice for the latter every single time.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to feel bad about it, right? This is how I feed my family. I'm not going to feel bad about that choice. I'm just saying it's a shame.
And your business is to provide housing. So additionally, like doing right by your business means you're going to provide more housing down the road.
100%.
When I was broke, I had rich habits. When I was broke, I had rich habits.